Hey, I'm Taylor, and this is Another Feral Feminist. Welcome to the very first episode of Another Feral Feminist. Today, we're going to kick things off with a pretty tough story. I figured, why not right out of the gate start things off super intense, just so you guys know who you're dealing with. We won't always have episodes that are this intense. Hopefully, I'm able to factor in some levity and just, some funny, lighthearted topics. But feminism by nature is kind of an intense subject. It's intense, it's political, it's emotional. And so, it just kind of lends itself to that naturally. But I want to kind of let you guys know this one does center around domestic violence for a piece of it. It's not the entire episode, but it is mentioned. So just be aware that there's a mention of it. There's also going to be a mention of rape. And so if you want to skip past that part, I'm going to let you know before I bring it up. But other than that, let's get into it. I'm going to be sharing my cousin's story. She's given me her permission because we both kind of recognize that, while this particular story is her story, this experience is not something that is unique. The trauma that she experienced happens to women all the time. These patterns play out in relationships every single day. I've seen them in my own life. I've seen them in lives of friends and now family and across our own feral flock community. Maybe you're even experiencing it right now. I hope you're not. But if you are, I want this story to be the sign that you've been waiting for, that reminder that you deserve better, and hopefully the inspiration that you need to leave in just the safest way possible. And I will be sharing some resources at the end of this that will hopefully put you in a better place to do that. So, without further ado, let me take you back to the night that changed everything, though none of us would actually realize that until quite a few years later. And this actually was not even the first red flag in my cousin's relationship. That had come a few months earlier when Abbey sat in her living room sobbing for hours after she told her boyfriend of 6 months that she was pregnant. And he told her that if she didn't get an abortion, he would just claim that the baby wasn't his. But as the weeks went on, it became clear to him that she was not going to terminate the pregnancy. And eventually he just kind of stopped fighting it. He never apologized for what he said to her. And, never really acknowledged how hurtful that was. He just started acting like this was their new reality. Like they were just like this normal family. And that whole vibe really impacted their overall relationship, I think. I actually didn't even know about this part until several years later. All I knew at the time of this event was that my favorite cousin was now 3 months pregnant with a perfect little boy, and she had invited me to their favorite BYOB pizza place to celebrate this. If you don't know, BYOB is like bring your own beverage or whatever, and so people will bring beer and alcohol and stuff like that. It's not like bring your own Dr. Pepper. But I go and I pick him up, and her boyfriend already has his 6-pack of beer ready to go. I mean, packed down in a cooler with ice. We're going to the lake. And I'm not much of a drinker. And even though my cousin used to go out with him every week into the bars, now that she's pregnant, she's obviously not a drinker either. So that's why it was kind of weird that we were celebrating her pregnancy at a BYOB. But, who am I to decide where they celebrate? Either way, it was clear when we were packing up to leave, this was his personal 6-pack. He might as well have had a little backpack, like a little boy, carrying his lunch to school or something. It was wild. And so this place that we went to is right down the street, and it just takes a few minutes to get there. So we get there, we get seated, we order our food, and the waitress is waitressing. She's being a waitress, everything's fine. We're there for maybe an hour and a half. And during that time, her boyfriend is slamming these beers. I mean, one after another. The pizza might as well have not even existed to him. His meal was Budweiser. And, I'm sure that you can guess, by the end of this, by the time the waitress brings us our bill, he is wasted. And, he's not sloppy drunk. He's not making a scene. But he definitely made the most of this like BYOB situation. It was clear that this venue was his idea. And I think that like if he had been a little bit more of a piece of shit at the time, that he would have told her that he was celebrating her pregnancy at a bar with his buddies and just like left her home. But anyway, the waitress brings us our check and he pays. He actually even leaves her a pretty decent tip. But this is the part that still is a little unclear, even to this day. Something must have happened that just set him off, because when we get up to leave, he suddenly decides that she doesn't deserve this tip anymore. And so he takes it back, puts it in his wallet. And Abby used to work in the service industry, so she is understandably livid about this. And she's trying to figure out why he just, flipped, like why he decided suddenly that she didn't deserve her tip. But, he's drunk and he's stupid and he's not making any sense, which just pisses her off even more. And so she keeps telling him to put the tip back. But, the more she pushes, the more belligerent he gets. And so I just tell her to take him to the car and I will leave a tip. So I walk back and I drop a 50 on the table because this waitress more than earned it, like putting up with him all night. And so after that, I head back to the car. The drive back to their apartment is like maybe 10 minutes. And the whole time, Abby is just laying into him. And honestly, rightfully so. Like, he was a real dick. And so by the time we get home, they're in a full-blown argument. And we go inside and I, hang back in the living room while they hash it out in their room. But then a few minutes later, I hear kind of like a ruckus, right? So I run in there and evidently he had lunged at her. He didn't hit her. But I mean, it was clear that this was a threat. So she backed up near the door because, she didn't know what he was going to do. And when I walk in, he goes to the closet. He starts pulling her clothes out of the drawers, throwing them on the floor, yanks all of her hanging clothes off the rod. Then he scoops everything up and he just tosses it on the bed and yells at her to get the fuck out. And he was pretty scary at this point. So we just left immediately. Like, we did not take a single thing with us. And that night she stayed at my house, where she cried for literal hours. At this point, it was impossible for her to ignore that he was actually an alcoholic. And that realization had hit her pretty hard, not just because of like what it meant for their relationship, but because it brought up something even deeper than that. Abby's mom is an alcoholic too, and she actually abandoned her when she was about 3 years old. And she could not believe that she was repeating this cycle with her unborn son and his dad. And I want to pause here for a minute, because situations like this are exactly why reproductive rights matter. At the beginning of this story, I told you that he wanted her to get an abortion. He didn't want to be a dad. And that's fair. Like, that's his choice. But he never made that clear to her from the very beginning. And his actions up until that point didn't align with it either. So Abby, on the other hand, had never even considered an abortion. Like, she always wanted to be a mom. But, if she had known before what she'd realized in this moment, that he was in fact in active addiction and that he had no intention of getting better, that she was going to share a child for the rest of her life with a man who would ultimately reinforce the insecurity and the trauma that she had experienced with her own mom, and then would also become a source of fear and like lifelong damage, really, for the child that they shared. Who knows? She might have made a different choice, and she should have that right. And, that is all I'm going to say about that topic for now. And we're going to move on. But when I was writing this episode, I asked her officially, I said, why did you stay? And as a survivor of abuse myself, like, I know that answer is so nuanced, but I also wanted to give her the opportunity to have her voice be heard, because we all have our reasons, right? So here's what Abby said. I wanted to rewrite my story. I wanted to prove that not only was I lovable enough for someone to recover from an addiction like alcoholism, but that my son was also worthy of that. He deserves two parents. He deserves the entire world and the life that I never had. And I thought that if I fought hard enough, I could give him that. I could force his dad into recovery. I could show him how wonderful it is to have this beautiful little boy in his life and that I could prove our family was worth it. This statement comes from her 5 years after the incident that I just told you about. And I want to highlight the mindset that goes into that because so often that's what keeps women stuck in these abusive situations. For a lot of survivors, they've been surviving for as long as they can remember. This partner is not their first abuser. Oftentimes, it's the trauma that they've already lived through that makes this feel normal, for lack of a better word. And whether that is from their childhood, like in Abby's case, or in previous relationships when love and pain and abandonment all get tangled up together, your baseline of what normal looks like can be really skewed. And you kind of end up like in this fucked up dichotomy of begging for comfort from the exact person that is actively hurting you. In case in point, over the next 5 years, Abby had 2 more children with him, and she experienced countless miscarriages. Every single instance, and I want to let you know that this is the part where we talk about the rape piece. So just be aware if you don't want to hear that. I don't go into great detail, but I do mention it. So just, skip, 15 seconds ahead. But every single instance, the 2 children that she had after her first and all of the miscarriages were the result of marital rape. Every single time she turned him down, he would get violent. So she learned that it was just safer to let it happen. He did not care if she was postpartum. He didn't care if she had just had a miscarriage. This was, in his words, her punishment for not getting an abortion the first time. This man has terrorized Abby for half of a decade, and not a single person in her family knew until a month ago. The thing at the pizza place was a red flag, but she convinced me over the years that it was just a bad night. And that is the cruel irony about abuse. There's this shame that comes along with it. And you straddle this line of knowing it's not normal, but like also wondering if maybe you're contributing to the problem. And so therefore you're somehow also at fault. For Abby, however, she got what I would certainly call poetic justice, because if alcoholics are going to do one thing, they're going to alcoholic, okay? And on Father's Day weekend of this year, he was actually picked up on his 3rd DWI charge. And if you know anything about DWIs, it is 3 strikes and you are out, my friend. So she used that as her chance to finally get as far away as she could from him. And she's been living her best life ever since. It's definitely been really difficult. During their marriage, she was not allowed to work. He would sabotage any interview that she had in a variety of ways. And eventually she was just afraid to even apply for work. But in the month that she has left, she has been able to get a part-time job, and her dad and her stepmom have helped get her and the kids into therapy and have hired her a lawyer so that she can file for divorce. She talks all the time about how lucky she was to escape and have the support of her family to fall back on. And part of me is still in shock that she was going through this behind closed doors. But as horrifying as her story is, unfortunately, it is not rare. And most women don't have the family support that she does. Statistically speaking, 1 in every 3 women will experience intimate partner violence in at least one relationship in their lifetime. And to be clear, these are the women who feel emboldened enough to report their abusers. And more than half of the women that do actually end up reporting have children under the age of 12. So, let's say a woman is fortunate enough to escape her abuser. So she takes the kids and she finally gets out. Where does she go from there? Because unless she has family support or was able to somehow save up enough money for first and last month's rent, she is going to most likely be forced into the refuge of a domestic violence shelter. But guess what? A report in 2024, so just last year, exposed the fact that half of the women's shelters in the U.S. were forced to turn away abuse victims because they were already at capacity. So not only is there that much abuse occurring in our country, but there's also not enough available resources to help support even more women who are getting abused. And you know what? You're not going to hear about those statistics in the media because even though that lack of societal support is absolutely abhorrent, we're talking about women and children here. And the patriarchy that runs so much of our world doesn't really give a fuck. So let's switch it up, right? Let's look at a different scenario. Let's say that she is lucky enough to have family support. Maybe even after the years of being forced to be a stay-at-home mom and doing all of this unpaid labor caring for the children 24/7, which doesn't count on a resume, maybe even after all of that, she is able to get a decent paying job. Well, now what? Who watches the kids while she works? We have a childcare crisis here in the US. Over half of Americans live in what's called a childcare desert, which basically means that there's about 3 kids for every 1 spot that's available. And even if you can find a spot at a place that is safe and clean and licensed, that doesn't have unsettling infractions on the state's website, the cost of that care has risen nearly 30% over the last 5 years. So since the pandemic, essentially. And now we have to take into account what this most recent legislation has done to Medicaid and food benefits that all directly impact low-income families that need this support to simply survive. All of this combined puts an almost insurmountable strain on single moms who are just trying to rebuild after leaving an abusive situation. It makes the concept of leaving seem practically and logistically impossible. And quite frankly, that is a fair assessment. Can you imagine being up against those odds? Like, just put yourself in this woman's shoes for 1 second. And I honestly think that, like, if the patriarchy possessed any kind of empathy whatsoever and weren't a bunch of men with like oddly sociopathic tendencies, that maybe we might actually, have some sort of societal support, but who am I, right? And even women that are gainfully employed when they leave, like across the financial spectrum here, like working class all the way up to middle class, they often find themselves unable to provide sufficiently simply because this societal support does not exist. And listen, as much as I hated statistics in college, I'm going to bring you back. 2 years post-separation, studies have shown that nearly half of women still remain in poverty. As of 2023, more than 30% of single mother households live below the poverty line. So that means that they would be getting resources like Medicaid and food stamps. But with new legislation, that is severely impacting their ability to do that, and also just how much they get in total each month when it comes to like food stamps and stuff like that. So we're already in crisis when it comes to single parent households and when it comes to women leaving abuse situations. I am so deeply concerned about where we're going to be next year, 5 years from now. It is haunting what could be to come. The patriarchy is just really like taking our most vulnerable members of society and leaving them to fend for themselves. So I'm not going to continue to bore you with statistics, but like the overarching theme here is that our society created a world where women are taught that doing it all for everyone else is noble, right? But we're not protected by the legal system. We're not protected by the courts. We're not supported by most churches. We're often not supported by our families. And that community that apparently existed at one point, evidently far before my generation, that really isn't there either. And all of this lack of support combines with us simultaneously being told that it's our job to forgive our abusers, to endure, and to just always be the bigger person. So if you are listening to this and you're thinking, wow, that sounds fucking familiar, I want you to hear me. You're not being dramatic when you're outraged by this. And if you are experiencing the things that women often experience in relationships with men, you do not deserve that. You're not weak and you're not alone. Leaving is hard because it is meant to be hard. But men benefit from you staying quiet. They benefit from you staying small. They benefit from you staying scared and dependent on them. Like I said at the top of this, while every episode of this podcast will not be nearly as intense, this is in fact an intense issue. And I would be a super shitty feminist if I didn't close this episode out by providing resources that actually do support women in crisis when it is clear that this part of our population is woefully underserved. So I'm going to share a few with you right now. The full list is available in the show notes. So if you need it, it is there. One of the best places to start is domesticshelters.org. It's a national directory where you can search for shelters near you and filter it out by things like whether they accept your pets, if they offer childcare, and if they have a space for teens, because especially teen boys are not always accepted into these shelters, which is another tangent I can go off on, but I don't want to make this first episode too long. You can also check out the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, or NCADV. They don't run shelters directly, but they are a major force when it comes to advocacy and survivor resources and just like overall policy change. They offer free guides on safety planning, financial abuse, and even how to support someone who is in an abusive relationship. So if you are trying to understand the bigger picture or even trying to build like a long-term plan for yourself or someone that you love, this is a really solid place to start. And finally, if you need someone to talk to right now, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is open 24/7. You can call 800-799-SAFE, that's SAFE, or you can just text START, START, to 88788. And that is a wrap on a very intense but very first episode of Another Feral Feminist. You can find me on TikTok at Another Feral Feminist, or on YouTube at Another Feral Feminist, or even on Instagram at Another Feral Feminist. You could even send me an email with your own survivor stories or just crazy bullshit man stories. And that is anotherferalfeminist@gmail.com. I would love for you to share this episode with your friends, rate it, and I will talk to you next Tuesday. And as always, stay feral and stay safe. Bye!